Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Political State Podcast. I'm Ben Felder with the Oklahoman. And joining me in the Oklahoman's podcast studio this week is Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt, who's been in office for nearly 14 months, right?
That sounds about right. Just over, I believe. Yeah.
Just over a year here. Mayor, thanks so much. Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We've just determined perhaps this is my inaugural appearance on this podcast, although not my inaugural appearance on a Ben Felder podcast. I've followed you throughout your podcast career.
We don't have time to get into all the stops that I've made in my short time here in Oklahoma, but yeah, I'm surprised that this is your first time on this podcast, considering it's been going on for a few years. Mm-hmm. But we can't avoid it anymore. You've become mayor. We've held out, and we finally have to.
My ban has been lifted. Thank you, Ben.
Well, we appreciate your time and welcome. And I will say that if at some point within a few hours of doing this podcast that I don't see a tweet from you announcing you were on the podcast, I'm going to feel really excited because you have become kind of the Twitter mayor. And it looks like this tweet's going to happen right now.
Well, we need to at least create the material for it. Here, we'll take a quick picture. So we've got that. You can't hear me taking this picture, but...
All right, it's official. We've got the photo,
we'll get
and
that
I
out
expect
later.
a tweet pretty soon. I say that because you have become a mayor that I think for most citizens, or maybe not most, but citizens who obviously are on social media, know you from Twitter. And I wonder, did you know you were going to be that active? I know you were when you were in the Senate, the state Senate, but did you know that you wanted to make that kind of one of your primary platforms and tools?
I guess I just didn't know any other way to be. I like sharing what I'm up to, and I like, being responsive to people. People quite often, especially if they're kind of in social media field, will come up to me and ask, is that really you? Because I recognize that, most political figures have some sort of team who does it for them or something, or maybe it's half them and half their team. But I have never allowed anyone else to have the password, ever. I think it's too dangerous and inauthentic. So I do it all myself. And so anytime you see me respond, that's really me. And I guess I just don't know any other way to do it. I really try to respond to everything unless it's just kind of off the wall, and it seems like more of a rhetorical statement than anything else. But otherwise, I try to be accessible, and it's a lot of work in a sense, but I usually know the answers, so just kind of fire it off as I go, and I've done it so long now that I feel comfortable with it. I wouldn't trust necessarily everybody to do that, but I think I haven't made any major mistakes yet. So, I enjoy that aspect of it. I do try to remind people, there's still well over half the city probably that doesn't frequently use social media. Yeah. So it's important to remember that you're not actually talking to every citizen when you put stuff out. And even though I use 3 mediums, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, I'm still, not reaching everybody by any means, through that. Although it's interesting that, traditional media, like even the paper and the TV stations, they all follow me. They're all almost universally on social media. So they'll use, the comments or pictures I share for, their stories. And I think that's great. And that way, I'm using the new mediums, but, getting exposure to people who maybe still rely on traditional mediums.
Yeah, and there's an aspect of your Twitter that's kind of the normal politicking, here I'm at this event or that kind of thing. But you've also kind of become pretty prolific in responding to constituents. I mean, if somebody tweets, even if they're complaining, my trash pickup was late today, you're liable to respond with a thread about how the repainting of trash trucks led to this ripple effect. And maybe half the time, a person's like, well, I just wanted to vent. But you're right. There is you have the knowledge, kind of the insider knowledge on what's happening at the city, and so you seem to use that.
Sometimes, maybe I just help them get their trash picked up and connect them to OKC Action or something. But sometimes if I get 2 or 3 of those, and there's some backstory, I might share it, in a thread, And sometimes I just wake up one day and I'm like, I need to talk. I've never really talked about. I remember there was a day, I think it was a Sunday. It's usually a weekend, it was a Sunday. It was like, I've never really kind of shared my thoughts on the next pro sports team, And so I did like a 20-tweet thread on that, kind of explaining all of that for anybody who might be interested. And I find those are always well received. And I wish I had time to just do that, just be like a person who's out there explaining, city government as much as I can. I wish I could do a lot more, like on our budget that we just passed, but sometimes time just doesn't allow it. But that's always been an element of my public service when I was a senator and now as a mayor, of trying to explain, try to bridge that disconnect, that people have. They often don't really understand who does what and why they do it, and I think there is some interest out there, and I think. public officials often do the public and themselves a disservice by not better explaining those things and just being honest, and just, sometimes I tell people what they don't want to hear, which is that I can't fix that. Mm-hmm. For instance, the people who tweet me almost every hour about stopped trains in Oklahoma City, but we got a link, to the Corporation Commission, and we can share that, but a lot of times it's me telling people, look, the mayor doesn't really influence that. But here's, here I try to be like a yes if person, not a no because, so your problem can be solved if you go, pursue this route. And as somebody who's worked at every level of government, I kind of do know how to play that traffic engineer a lot for people.
But, by doing that, you kind of do put a bigger spotlight on yourself, and you also maybe in the public's mind, you become responsible for more things. And I think, this is a fairly weak mayor system in terms of, on the council you have a vote and you have certain powers mm-hmm. and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And FYI, that was my phone that rang, not the mayor. So just don't want people to think that he was rude and didn't turn off his phone. But and what I mean by that is I think in the past, and I don't necessarily mean this as a criticism, but there are certain aspects of city life or city issues that would happen, and you may go to the mayor, and especially if it's controversial, maybe the mayor would say, "Well, listen, I just want to vote on the council. I'm not, mm-hmm. There's a department that oversees that," and you don't really seem to defer to that to the weak part of your position. You seem to really understand your platform, I guess is what I'm saying.
Suppose, but I certainly don't want to mislead anybody. I certainly, if they want a major policy change, I'm not going to not tell them that, look, you got to get 5 votes on the council for that. I can't unilaterally make that change, and I'm not shy about telling people that. But at the same time, I'm not shy about just being accessible on all issues, because I think people expect that. People, regardless of their system that they live in, basically all look at their mayors the same. The mayor, the people of New York look at their mayor pretty much the same way as the people of Oklahoma City look at their mayor. Nobody wants me to tell them, call the city manager, because they can't elect the city manager. So I feel like, I have to play that ombudsman liaison role, no matter what the topic is. Now, again, it may be me sort of kind of handing things off or explaining, what the path that person should follow that may or may not involve me. But I definitely want to weigh in and be responsive. And I don't know, maybe if that implies responsibility, so be it. But I certainly embrace whatever responsibility it is that I'm expected to have, and don't shirk from that. And kind of like let the chips fall where they may on that regards.
Yeah. Well, going back to just your embrace of Twitter, I thought something that might be a little interesting to do would be a little Mayor Holt Twitter trivia. So I want to ask you. I was kind of taking a look at some Twitter reports for your feed, and was just curious how much you may or may not know. Maybe you do look at these reports. Maybe you don't. But right. I think you may. Even if you don't, I think you may. It'd be interesting to see what your guesses would be on some of these questions. But so I looked up the user that you have replied to the most. So the person on Twitter that you have replied to the most.
Oh, this is hilarious.
I'm curious. Who do you think that might be?
There are definitely like some regulars, and I'd recognize their names probably if you said. But who? I don't know.
There's probably, when you become mayor of the city, there's probably a folder that someone hands you and say, this is going to be one of your responsibilities to interact with this person.
Well, Steve Lackmeyer, obviously.
You've got the right answer, okay. Yes. So the Oklahoman Steve Lackmeyer.
It's in the charter,
is somebody that you have, is the person you've responded to the most by a large amount.
That's great. Yes, perfect. Of course. Yes. Okay. No, I think it's in the charter. It's like you must preside over the council meetings. You must make at least 80% of them. You must deal with Steve Lackmeyer.
Yes. Okay. And I think this one may be pretty easy for you.
Hope he listens to these podcasts.
Well, we'll see if he does. I'm not going to say anything to him. I'm just going to put it on him to tell me. Your most used hashtag. I think this will be easy for you.
Oh, 1OKC. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So hashtag the number one.
I didn't know you could do this. You could just pull this up. Okay, this is fun. Keep going.
There's various services out there. It took me a while to find a free one because I didn't want to pay for it. But yeah, you can look up all this information on your tweet. So your most retweeted tweet.
Well, I do know. I have an innate sense that all of my most popular tweets relate to the Thunder.
You'd be correct. Yeah.
I don't have an official ranking, but I know that to be true. And I kind of remember in the last year there was one that sort of went extra. Like, sometimes you get like 1,000 likes or something, and that's kind of like a memorable day. But It was. I think it was. Oh no, you didn't.
You're right. Yeah. Do you care to explain this tweet?
So, who are we playing? Was it
the Timberwolves?
The Timberwolves. So we were playing the Timberwolves, and their star, whose name escapes me, Wiggins.
Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah, had a really good game. And for whatever reason, the Timberwolves official account decided that what they would tweet was, what did you say? The mayor of Oklahoma City.
A picture of Wiggins shooting. I think he scored 40 in that game,
Yeah.
a career high for him at the time.
Yeah.
Probably still stands. And all they said was
the mayor of Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
So another funny thing is, it seems like my best tweets are my shortest ones. So all I did was I quoted that tweet and I said, "Oh no, you didn't."
Yeah.
And just let it go. And then I think that got over 10,000 likes or something.
I didn't write down how many likes and retweets it had. I think it was January 9th. It was January of this year. But yeah, by far your most retweeted
I think
tweet.
that was pretty significant. I don't know that I've been over 2,000 more than 2 or 3 times. So.
Okay. Your busiest Twitter day?
Busiest Twitter day. Do you think this would be something that I would not be surprised by when you?
I don't know that any of them has rhyme or reason. It's an interesting nugget.
I don't know. I'll have to get
Thursday.
Oh, you mean like day of the week?
Day of the week. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Day of the week.
It's Thursday.
Then your busiest hour.
Busiest hour. Noon.
6 p.m.
6 p.m.
So guys, 6 p.m. on Thursday.
This is like a window into my soul, Ben. I feel like you see me more deeply than I wish you could be able to.
At 6 p.m. on Thursday, you're liable to be tweeting about the Thunder or responding to something that Steve Blackmeyer said.
That's the typical tweet of the mayor would be a 6 p.m. Thursday tweet to Steve Blackmeyer about the Thunder.
Getting back to kind of your business as mayor, like we said, it's been a little bit more than a year, about 14 months that you've been in office. When you look back at your first year, your accomplishments, and I think there's been a few things that you've gotten done. What are you most proud of? What do you think have been the most significant for you so far in the first year of your first term?
Well, the first thing I would say, and Mick had a good line on this. My predecessor, Mick Cornett, said something like, if things are going well, my first question would be, who was the mayor 10 years ago? And so I really believe that to be the case. That so many of the things you're doing are planting seeds, planting trees so that our grandchildren have shade, and so. And as you alluded to earlier, I mean, there's not a lot that the mayor of Oklahoma City does unilaterally, other than maybe boards and appointments, and we can talk about that. But because you've certainly been someone exploring that issue, but you're cajoling, you're building coalitions, you're laying the groundwork for later successes. And so when I think about the first year, I mean, I'm pleased in things I've done that I think build that foundation that I could do unilaterally, which is obviously like things like just using social media to project, the new vision of our city, to use social media to, and my own kind of physical presence to kind of project a new idea of what is Oklahoma City, what is it that the mayor and the other city leaders think about, what do they participate in, where are they, and being out and about in a different way is symbolic, but it also, I think, has real substance in that it just makes people feel differently about their city and makes them pay attention to different things. So I certainly feel like I very deliberately from minute one came in with that intent of using the platform of the position, and so I'm proud of that. And I think that sort of embodies that whole sort of one OKC message that I've projected. I'd say. More substantively, boards and commission appointments. I'll steal your thunder and say that you came in, you and your team came in just as I was taking office and evaluated our boards and commissions as they were when I took the oath, and found that they were 90% white and 70% male, and probably you didn't do this analysis, but probably a similarly high percentage from Northwest Oklahoma City, and probably a similar percentage of older generations, and so, even before I took office, I talked about that, and I feel like I followed through. I mean, there's always more appointments to make, and I've got a few on my desk right now I need to work on, but as I've had the opportunity over the last few months, I've definitely tried to move that needle. It's probably more of a 4-year process because, as we've discussed, they're not. I don't get every appointment on day one, but I think we've really made a lot of progress there, and that is something the mayor can really more directly control. I mean, ultimately, all those appointments have to be approved by the council, but it's definitely a conversation that is 99% driven by the mayor, and I'm proud of that for sure. I think I'm also proud of how far we are in the Maps 4 process and how that's been developed. And actually, as we sit here, by the time people listen to this, Bill Crum will have checked the council agenda, and he will probably be reporting on the 15 or so things that we're going to hear presentations on, because the council agenda comes out on Friday for Tuesday's meeting. And so everyone soon will, and as they listen to this, they'll already know all the things that we're going to be hearing about. And I think it really reflects, the priorities of the citizens here in 2019. And I'm proud that we've developed a process that so far is continuing to reflect what I think is really important to people. And it's a little different than what's been important to people in the past. And it took, a little bit of leadership to make sure that that happened, right? That we didn't fall into just the old patterns and end up diverging from where the people of Oklahoma City were, just because we were following, the models of Maps 1 and Maps 3. But I think the people have made it clear, and we've given them the opportunity to make it clear, that though they really like maps and they like the idea of investing in our city, they have a slightly different subject matter in mind this time.
Yeah, you referenced that list, and as you said, Oklahoman's Bill Crum is going to be reporting on that intensely today and tomorrow. It's Friday afternoon as we sit down and talk. I have a copy of the list in kind of some broad terms. I just kind of wanted to go through some things here and correct me if I'm wrong on some of these things. But here's essentially what we're looking at. Transit's a big thing. Maybe not necessarily streetcar expansion, but bus rapid transit, bus shelters, traffic signal priority, health and wellness centers for seniors. The State Fair Coliseum, maybe a soccer stadium is on there. Parks, trails, homelessness, mental health, Palomar, the beautification, youth centers, innovation district from a job creation standpoint, animal shelter, some endowments, and so that's just a broad kind of brush of what this list is going to include. But it's already noticeable that what's absent is just the heavy reliance on large capital projects. You're talking about things like addressing mental health or homelessness, things that you've talked about already. Why is this the time to include these things, in the next iteration of Maps?
The crisis of 1993, when this whole journey started, was that there was nothing to do here. And that may seem like a superficial problem, but it was an existential crisis for our city. And I'm sitting here, and you're sitting here, and a whole lot of young people, 40 and younger, are sitting here in Oklahoma City, largely because we addressed that. And we may not consciously think that. Like, we're not like, well, I live here because we have an NBA team. That sounds preposterous, right? Nobody would say that. But there is this seemingly critical link between having all of those sort of big city amenities, entertainment amenities, and your sort of level of interest in living in that place. And so by building those foundations in 1993 through a sports arena and a ballpark and a canal and thereby creating really our first entertainment district, and just doing all those other things, lots of other things, ripple effects happened in food culture and art culture and music culture and obviously sports culture. And so all of those things built upon the foundation of Maps and now made a city that we want to live in. Well, so that's all great. That's the story of Maps. That was the crisis of 1993. But just because the crisis of 1993 was that there was no fun stuff here doesn't mean that that's always going to be the problem. And obviously, when you've invested in those things for 25 years, maybe there's some other things that are now popping up a little bit. And I think as it's developed and all the investments that we've made through Maps 1 and Maps 3, and Maps 3 now has added a convention center and a park and a streetcar, we basically have all the building blocks of a great American downtown now. And so is that the greatest challenge today, or is it mental health and domestic violence and homelessness? That seems to be, quite reasonably what now is the crisis. I think an open question might have been a year ago was, well, is that, okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but is that what the people think it is? But through this process of gathering ideas, through being very accessible as I am, and the other 8 elected officials at City Hall, all of us kind of being these weather vanes out there, kind of listening to the people of Oklahoma City, over the last year, I think we determined, not only do we see it as opinion leaders and policymakers, but everybody's seeing that as the crisis. And look, there's still some stuff maybe on the sort of quality of life side that we need to do. We all know what the thunder has meant to the city. We want to make sure that relationship is strong. There's certainly a very valid conversation about all the business that is conducted over at the State Fair and and anybody who spends 2 minutes in that arena knows that it's a dump and that it needs to be addressed. I mean, so those are things that are on the list too. But I mean, if you look at the totality of the list, 70-80% of it is different kind of stuff, a deviation from maps 1 and 3. Now, I often say maps 1 and 3. So what am I leaving out? Well, I'm leaving out maps 2, which really was more a neighborhood-focused, human capital-focused initiative. Maps for kids, rebuilding all the schools in our city. Well, maybe that's the pattern we ultimately start to develop into. Maybe it's looking at the core of our city, looking at our quality of life, and then making sure we're taking care of the basics, and then, maybe then 10 years later, it is time again to make sure we've taken care of the core of our city and the quality of life, and then turn again to, the neighborhoods and the human needs of our city. And maybe that's how it develops. We'll let the next mayors figure all that out. But in terms of maps 1, 2, 3, 4, I think that's maybe developing into the pattern. And so maps 4 is, I think, going to be predominantly focused on what I would characterize as neighborhood needs and human needs, and that's where the people of Oklahoma City seem to be. And it's certainly, as a person immersed in the needs of this community, I recognize it too. That's the crisis we need to address. Certainly, what young professionals are focused on. They enjoy the quality of life amenities, but I think when you're trying to attract millennials, you also have to have a city that has a heart, and is taking care of the least among us, and is addressing, all of these issues and making sure that a lot of people aren't being left behind just by virtue of the things you've chosen to invest in. So I think when you look at that list, it's an exciting, thought that we might prioritize those kinds of things for the next 10 years. And then I feel like we really are taking care of all the different, columns in the ledger that make a great city.
Yeah. So you previously were chief of staff for Mayor Cornett, and during your time or after, I'm not sure, you wrote a book.
Yes,
put a
after.
plug
Yes.
in for the book.
Thanks.
Are you still
Good.
plugging that book? I'm not sure where.
It is actually down to its last 20 copies or so
Really?
at Full Circle Books. So it's almost out of print.
So get it while you can. But Big League City, and it was kind of a story, a little bit about just kind of the this kind of history of trying to rejuvenate downtown a little bit, but really a focus on Mayor Cornett trying to get an NBA team in Oklahoma City. And so if we fast forward 10 or 15 years, and someone on your staff were to pen a book about you, maybe J.D. Baker, writes a book about yours. What do you feel like, or what do you hope will be kind of the seminal effort of yours? Because I think one of the things that comes across in the book is for Mayor Cornett, there was this determination to, and it goes beyond it, just to get a team here. But I mean, really focused on the NBA and putting the city in a position, not just because he was a sports fan, which he was, but knowing or feeling like what it would mean to the city, that there was this driving factor to do something that at the time seemed kind of impossible.
Yeah.
If a book is written about you, Big League City 2, let's say, what do you feel like you would want that book to be about when it talks about your time as mayor?
Well, I mean, look, you can only bring professional sports to your city for the first time once, and so I think that is as significant a change in a city's development as almost anything else other than its birth, and that's what I wrote in the book. This was that the arrival of professional sports was the most important thing that had happened in Oklahoma City, positive important thing that had happened in Oklahoma City since the land run. So, I won't, that's already been done. That box has been checked, So even if I brought a second team, it would never be as exciting as the first. So I think whatever I accomplish will be slightly more nuanced, but I think that what I hope to do is, I think I'm a transitional mayor, I mean, I think I'm sitting in this seat at a time when the city is transitioning demographically. 60% of the kids of Oklahoma City are non-white. I think I'm sitting in this chair at a time when we're transitioning generationally. I mean, I'm obviously an example of that. I'm the youngest mayor in 100 years, but you've got, 5 of the 9 elected officials are 40 or younger. And you just see that transition in leadership happening in the private sector, in the public sector, all across the city. I think it's a political transition, obviously, as we've got, elected our first Democratic congressman from Oklahoma City in 40 years last year with Kendra Horn. So, I mean, you've got this transition happening across all fronts, and my claim to fame, I would hope, is that I manage it in a way that we're all still friends, right? That we keep that unity that we've had for 25 years, and it doesn't become a sense that these different factions of the city are defeating one another. So I think that transition kind of to being a truly big city is what I'll be a part of, and hopefully successfully. Obviously, Maps 4 and those investments will be hopefully a successful part of the legacy I leave as mayor. And somewhat unusual that I would have to face that challenge, so quickly into my tenure, but that's just kind of what the calendar dictated. I also think I hope I leave behind, a different legacy of obviously inclusiveness and diversity and sort of appreciating what Oklahoma City really has had for a long time. It just hasn't highlighted. I think I definitely set out, it would be entirely reasonable if people assumed when I was running for mayor, like, well, he was Mick's chief of staff. It's just kind of like Mick 2.0 or whatever, and I certainly learned a lot from him and value him as a friend, and obviously an incredibly successful mayor for 14 years. But I also knew that the problems of 2018 that I was walking into were vastly different than the challenges of 2004, and you're very much a product of your time. And so, as mayor. And so I came in here, determined to be the mayor of this moment and be my own mayor, and I hope that people have noticed that. I think one thing that I haven't touched on as much as I'd like to yet, but I've kind of got it in the hopper for 2020, and it's something you and I've talked about in the past, is obviously education. And so, I'm only, by the time Maps 4 passes or fails, hopefully passes, I'll be less than 2 years in office. I've got a lot of life ahead of me, and so, my hope then would be to turn to education and follow through on really creating a community vision for public education in Oklahoma City, like I've talked about. But sometimes, you just can't do it all in the first year. But obviously, Maps 4 has dominated and will dominate even more the next 6 months of my life. But once that's over, and that political part of it is behind us, that's definitely kind of my priority for 2020, I think, is to have that community conversation about public education. So hard to predict today where all that leads, but that could very much be a part of what I leave behind too.
Yeah. In working on another story, I was revisiting a book, The Metropolitan Revolution, kind of a popular book about the transformation of cities from several years ago. And there's a chapter on Denver, specifically on kind of their regional transit system and how they kind of got to where they were. And there's a part where it talks about John Hickenlooper, who was the mayor of Denver. And it says he prided himself on saying repeatedly that the days of Denver making decisions for its own benefit without the suburbs are over, and this concept of regionalism. And I was reading that recently, and I thought, well, you're coming in the studio, I want to ask you about this. And I know you know the mayors of the surrounding suburbs, but it hasn't been something that I've seen a lot of talk about. But I'm curious, what role does regionalism play for you, being the mayor of the hub city of this region,
right,
and what role do you see the suburban communities playing in the continued transformation and growth of Oklahoma City?
We're somewhat unusual, as you're well aware, with our size. So, by being 620 square miles, we so physically dominate the region in a way that very few large cities do. We have, for example, here's one stat, and this would be a fun stat for you to look up. We have 650,000 people in the city proper, and there's 1.3, 1.4 in the metro. Well, that ratio of basically the major city having half of the metro population is very high. We're larger. Oklahoma City, the city of Oklahoma City, has more people than the city of Atlanta. Okay, and that blows people's minds because they're like, wait, Atlanta's like a top 10 city or something. Yeah, the metro
yeah.
So if Atlanta only has like 400,000 people in it, that means its metro is like 5, 6, 7 times larger than the city. Well, that's not the case here. We have half the people are in our city. So what does that mean for regionalization? It means obviously that it's not as front of mind because we happen to have more of the people in our own city limits than other places. But that's not to say that there's no role for it, obviously. And so in regional transit, it's certainly come up. And I'm excited that this year, we created with Edmond, Norman, Moore, Midwest City, and Del City, the state's first regional transit authority. We sent Governor Brad Henry and Mary Malone to represent Oklahoma City there. And that's going to be a big conversation as well. Slipped my mind for a moment, but there's very, very reason to believe that by the time I leave this office, we'll have made a major regional commitment to transit that'll be historic in our area. And that conversation looms 2 or 3 years out. So that's one major manifestation of a regional approach. But beyond that, no, you're right. I mean, we don't, we meet at ACOG. I mean, there's coordination as appropriate between all the cities. But it hasn't played quite the same role in other places, because in other places, there's an interesting relationship when you have 80% of your people live outside the city, but everybody who lives in the metro recognizes that the survival of that city is important. There is like more sort of back and forth trying to figure out a way for everyone to succeed. Whereas here, we're kind of just doing it naturally and everybody seems okay. I mean, the suburban areas probably wish they had more financial resources for their own infrastructure. I'm sure that's the case. We're so dependent on sales tax here, and that forces us to battle each other sometimes over, which side of the street a Walmart's going to be on.
Yeah.
But, we get along great as people, and I think Oklahoma City is a really good neighbor in a lot of emergencies. I mean, we don't really, check the city limits when there's a fire. We rush in with our police and our first responders quickly. We have reciprocal agreements with all of our suburbs. So it's a weird thing, obviously, what we have here, to have especially so many suburbs that are interior suburbs that are surrounded by Oklahoma City on all four sides. And it makes for some confusion with the electorate, where try to figure out what city they actually live in. But I feel like we're in a decent place. I think it's an unexplored territory. I mean, really, regionalism, other than transit, has not moved much here.
Well, and that's a great point, that regionalism maybe looks differently in a city like Oklahoma City because of its size and its scope. And I think about, for example, the bus rapid transit line along Northwest Expressway in Classen that's in development. I don't believe that's all inside Oklahoma City, right?
Yes, although if it went a little farther than where it's predicted, Meridian, it would then enter War Acres.
But it is kind of connecting a somewhat suburban community with downtown without having to leave the city.
Yeah.
I grew up in Kansas City, which may be the other extreme. I mean, you're daily leaving the state and the other cities, and there's this big battle when you have the identity of Kansas City, Missouri, that has the sports teams and the arts and the culture. How do you get everyone else to invest in that? And maybe that's not as big of a challenge here, but probably still somewhat of a challenge. I would say. So when you think about, let's talk about transit here, and we've got just a few minutes left here. But you talk about when you leave office, whenever that is, you think there'll be some kind of big commitment or big emphasis on regional transit. Specifically, what do you think that will look like?
Well, so we've created this regional transit authority. It has representatives from Edmond, Norman, Moore, Midwest City, Del City, and Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City has a voting weight on the major issues in front of the RTA, Regional Transit Authority, that is commensurate with its population and tax base. And so even though we only have two people and all the other cities have one, and therefore it would appear we're outnumbered, our two people, Governor Henry and Mary Malone, actually carry more voting power. Okay. So interesting. But anyways, I don't necessarily think there'll be like contested votes, but if there ever were, we still have the appropriate level of political weight in that conversation. But all of the cities are understand that this RTA is just a meeting without a funding source. It's got to eventually find a revenue stream to construct something. And, the state law allows sales tax. And so, I think what they're engaged in, they've just been meeting, since January, is a planning process so that they can credibly go forward to the voters of Oklahoma City, Edmond, Norman, Moore, Midwest City, and Del City, which is unprecedented. We've had county votes, we've had city votes, we've never had a 6-city vote, and so that looms ahead. But I think the idea is that they would come forward to that new voting pool of 6 combined cities with a plan and some sort of sales tax component, and seek the approval of that region to move forward and fund such a plan, pay for such a plan, and then implement it, which will take many, many years. And it took 10 years to get to this point. And it'll take 10 more years. I don't want anyone to think, even on the day of a vote, that they're very close to riding a train from Edmond to Norman. But it's definitely never going to happen if we don't move forward with this planning and then ultimately with implementation and a tax. Nothing is free. So, but that's why I sought out somebody like Governor Henry and somebody like Mary Malone, obviously who you know well, because I wanted people that with a high level of credibility and a high level of experience with civic affairs and understand how to use these positions and how to oversee things of this magnitude, and then how to communicate them to the larger public. So I'm excited about where it all leads. It's very real. It hasn't necessarily gotten a lot of attention or a lot of coverage, but it's something we're definitely highly prioritizing. And again, like Governor Henry was sort of on my A team. When I was running for office, he said, because he's been largely absent, from public life in the last 8 years, but when I was running for mayor, he said, I really want to do something again, something big, and so I filed that away. And when this came along, I said, this is the thing. This is the thing I want to use a member of my A team on. I've got somebody with that credibility and that experience to do something this important. So he's the chair now of the RTA. So that's what the RTA is, and that's where regional transit goes. It also means that as we talk about MAPS 4 and we talk about transit in MAPS 4, we're not talking about regional transit. We sort of have that now. It's kind of been handed off to this other group of people, really a different government now. And so when we do talk about transit in MAPS 4, it will be more about our bus system, our intra-city, transit.
Yeah. Well, final question for you, maybe the most important, is how much do you miss being in the state Senate?
Not at all.
It's got to be, I'm sure it's just driving at you. You read the stories. You want to get in there, right?
Oh, man. Yeah. No, what I read, there was, you guys must have fun with them, but stories about, there was this session, some hearing being gavelled closed, and then the governor storming up to somebody's office, and the door was locked, and I was just thinking, oh my goodness, what a mess! And I just don't miss that at all. It was just all those reindeer games, But I loved, obviously, why I did this initially was being able to step into a great, professional, well-intentioned government, visionary background, a track record of success. Very functional, and none of that silliness. And I work really hard every day to make sure that it never creeps in to Oklahoma City's City Hall. And so far, so good. And I think we're all getting to know each other now. We sort of have this new team. There's these 9 of us, and many of us, I didn't know personally 2 of the 3 newest council members until they were running and winning, but I think we're all figuring each other out and everything. But I just sort of throughout the whole thing, because I think this is the failing really of the legislature ultimately, is just the lack of sort of human empathy and the ability for people to break through their partisan divisions and their rural-urban divisions, and so I work really hard with our city council to make sure that we treat each other with respect and civility, and we give each other heads ups on things, and we're just very transparent. And that doesn't mean like that we're always going to vote the same way, but that it's not some sort of gotcha thing all the time. And so far so good. But that's a big part of my role. I mean, nobody else but the mayor can really help the 9 people sort of stay, an effective, respectful civil body that's moving the city forward. And I think probably lessons learned in the legislature and things that could have been done maybe to keep everybody more civil and more productive. And I try to, now that I'm sort of sitting in that seat as the central figure there, I try to fulfill that role as best I can.
Is that largely a product because you don't have to work with an R or D next to your name? I mean, is that technically?
Well, that helps. I mean, that helps. But even if we did, I'd like to think we could overcome that, But certainly the fact that you don't have that, I think helps.
Yeah. I mean, last week on this episode, we had Representative Shane Stone, and the topic came up of Democrats that were going after him because he'd endorsed a Republican, which was his dad, running for city council in a nonpartisan race. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just it creeps into it. In partisan politics, it's a major part of just a political sphere and something that we cover, but it's not a part of city politics. And I just wonder if that is kind of providing this.
No, it definitely helps. I mean, I think I've at this point in my life just despise partisanship and the fact that it divides us the way it does. And basically, it's gotten to the point where people don't even have principles anymore. They just have a jersey, And so, no, I love that aspect of Oklahoma City Hall.
Because, I mean, and I say this, and I will get hate mail saying this, why even bring in partisan? I mean, you were a Republican in the Senate, but, you're just talking about working with, Congresswoman Kendra Horn, and it would, I guarantee it would be hard to find a Republican who would say something positive about Horn or vice versa. I mean, and it just kind of allows you that freedom to be able to work with the elected officials around you.
Yeah, which is as it should be. And, there's a time for the arguments. It's the election time, and I think that election time should be somewhat finite, and then you move on and you work together. And all I really want now in elected officials are people who are thoughtful and civil and have good intentions. And beyond that, I mean, we'll work through the policy differences, and we'll find, if we really talk to each other, we'll find some sort of compromise that pleases 80% of the electorate. And you kind of have to let the extremes go, But as long as somebody is sort of practical and pragmatic, I don't really care anymore what their party registration is, or even what their particular views on issues are, as long as they're willing to let other people succeed sometimes and find win-win solutions. Everything about American politics right now is I win, you lose, and guess what? That never actually happens, so nothing's happening, at the state and federal levels, especially at the federal level. And here at Oklahoma City, for 25 years or more, we have found a way to let me win a little and let you win a little. And that spirit of compromise has to continue, and obviously it's going to be inherent to MAPS 4. MAPS is inherently a compromise. As long as you feel like some of the needs of the community that you perceive are being met, you have to be okay with the fact that somebody else is going to see some of the needs that they perceive being met and not be mad about that, and not want everything just the way you want it, because we learned in like elementary school that doesn't work, So I'm going to continue to stand for that ideal just as much as any sort of political proposition. I continue to stand for, just the way of government that made this country great for 200 years that we need to return to. So just as much as anything else I do as mayor, I also think, that one of my legacies that I try to leave as a public servant is, governing the way that it actually works, which is through pragmatism and compromise, and collaboration between people who have different worldviews.
Yeah. Well, Mayor Holt, we'll let you get back to tweeting at Steve Lackmeyer. I'm sure your feed is just an hour off. Is probably already full with that. So, but Mayor, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for all you guys do. Really appreciated it. The newspaper specifically and the media in general play such a critical role in our story here. I want people to know what's going on at City Hall, and you do a great job. You and Bill Crum and everybody else here who covers City Hall especially does a great job.
Well, I appreciate that. And, the transformational aspect of what we're doing, too. We're in a state of transition and trying to figure that out. So hopefully we can figure that out together. So, Mayor Holt, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Political State Podcast, which you can find each and every week on your favorite podcasting app, also on YouTube or at oklahoman.com. I'm Ben Felder. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.